They say that mixing business with your marriage is a recipe for absolute disaster. But when you are 25 years old and deeply in love, you don't listen to the warnings. You just look at the person standing across from you, holding your hands in a messy, cramped apartment kitchen, and you truly believe that the two of you are going to conquer the world together. My name is Maya, and for 7 years I poured my blood, my sweat, and my entire soul into building an empire with my husband, Greg. Or at least, I thought it was our empire. It turns out I was just the unpaid labor building a castle for him and his mistress. Let me take you back to the beginning. Greg and I shared a dream of opening a high-end, rustic fusion restaurant. I was the culinary genius. I had spent years traveling, learning from master chefs, and perfecting a completely unique menu. My signature dishes, a crimson truffle ravioli and a honey-glazed ricotta tart, were culinary masterpieces. People would eventually line up for blocks just to get a taste of them. Greg, on the other hand, was the charismatic businessman. He didn't know how to boil water, but he knew how to talk to investors, manage the front of the house, and handle the paperwork. When we finally secured the funding to open our restaurant, which we named the Copper Branch, Greg was the one who handled the legal incorporation. He told me that to simplify the taxes and liability, he was going to register the LLC entirely under his name. I was young, exhausted from spending 16 hours a day in the test kitchen, and blindly in love. I trusted him completely. I didn't care whose name was on the corporate tax returns. I just wanted to cook. The Copper Branch was an overnight sensation. Within our first year, we were booked out 3 months in advance. Fruit critics were writing glowing articles about my menus. We were making incredible money. For 5 years, I practically lived in that kitchen. I worked through holidays, anniversaries, and extreme exhaustion. I missed my own sister's wedding because we had a massive private catering event for a celebrity that Greg insisted we could not cancel. I gave the restaurant my entire youth. But as the restaurant grew more successful, Greg began to change. He started wearing designer suits, buying expensive watches, and spending less time helping me at the restaurant and more time networking at high-end bars. He hired a 22-year-old hostess named Chloe. Chloe was stunning, ambitious, and had a habit of looking at my husband like he was the center of the universe. I ignored the red flags until I couldn't ignore them anymore. One night, I came home early from the prep kitchen because I was feeling violently ill. I walked into our master bedroom and found Greg and Chloe tangled in our expensive sheets. My entire world shattered in a single second, but the heartbreak was only the beginning of the nightmare. When I confronted him and demanded a divorce, Greg didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, his demeanor turned completely ice cold. He moved out that night, and the very next morning, I was served with divorce papers by a man in a gray suit. When we sat down for the legal mediation, I realized just how meticulously Greg had planned my execution. His high-powered, expensive attorneys slapped a thick stack of corporate documents onto the table. They pointed out that the Copper Branch LLC was legally owned 100% by Greg. My name was nowhere on the corporate charter, the lease agreement, or the business bank accounts. According to the law, I wasn't a co-founder. I was just an employee. I sat there, completely paralyzed, as Greg looked at me with a smug, arrogant smile. "I'll be generous, Maya," he said, adjusting his Rolex. "I'll give you a severance package of $50,000. But you are formally evicted from the premises. Chloe is going to be taking over as the general manager starting tomorrow." $50,000. For a restaurant that was currently valued at over $3 million. A restaurant that was entirely built on my recipes, my sweat, and my passion. I begged the mediators. I cried. I explained that I was the chef. The food was mine. The Greg's lawyers just coldly recited the corporate ownership laws. They legally forced me out of my own business, handed me a pitiful check, and banned me from stepping foot inside the kitchen I had designed with my own 2 hands. Greg won. He got the multi-million-dollar restaurant, the massive income, and the shiny new girlfriend to replace me. He thought he had completely destroyed me. He thought I was just a naive, foolish chef who didn't understand how the real world of business worked. But Greg made one fatal, catastrophic mistake. He assumed I was stupid. You see, years ago, before we even opened the doors of the Copper Branch, before the LLC was ever filed, I had quietly sought out some advice from an old mentor of mine in the culinary industry. He told me to always protect my art. So 3 months before Greg formed the LLC, I secretly hired an intellectual property lawyer. I personally trademarked the exact name, the Copper Branch, and the exact design of the logo under my own individual name. Furthermore, I legally registered my entire menu, including the exact, highly specific chemical composition and preparation methods of the crimson truffle ravioli and the honey glazed ricotta tart as protected trade secrets and copyrighted culinary properties belonging solely to me. Greg's LLC owned the building's lease and the chairs in the dining room, but I owned the brand. I owned the soul of the restaurant. And I had kept those legal documents locked in a safety deposit box for 7 years, never saying a word. I didn't tell him this during the divorce. I let him have his moment of victory. I took the $50,000, signed the final divorce papers, and waited in the shadows like a ghost. 2 months later, Greg announced a massive grand reopening of the Copper Branch. He spent over $100,000 renovating the dining room to suit Chloe's specific tastes. They bought massive billboards, paid for local television ads, and invited every major food critic in the city to a highly publicized VIP opening night. They were using my restaurant's name, and they were advertising my exact signature menu to draw in the massive crowds. Opening night arrived. The restaurant was packed with local celebrities, investors, and critics. Greg and Chloe were standing at the front door wearing matching designer outfits, popping champagne and posing for photographs. They looked like royalty. That is exactly when my lawyer, accompanied by 2 armed private process servers, walked through the front doors. They marched right past Chloe, stepped directly in front of the flashing cameras, and loudly handed Greg a massive, thick legal binder. It was an emergency federal cease and desist order backed by an immediate injunction from a federal judge. My lawyer stood in the middle of the crowded restaurant and informed Greg, loudly enough for the food critics to hear, that he was illegally infringing on my registered trademarks and copyrighted trade secrets. The injunction was absolute and legally devastating. Greg was ordered to immediately cease using the name The Copper Branch. He was ordered to take down the massive custom neon sign outside. But worst of all, the court order legally prohibited his kitchen from preparing, serving, or selling any of my 24 signature recipes. Greg's face drained of all color. Chloe started screaming at the process servers. The food critics, realizing they were witnessing a massive scandal, started furiously typing on their phones. Greg tried to fight it, of course. But you cannot fight federal intellectual property law when the trademarks were filed years before the company even existed. He had zero legal defense. The fallout was instantaneous and absolutely beautiful to watch. Because he couldn't use the name, Greg had to frantically rebrand the restaurant overnight to a generic, terrible name. But more importantly, because he couldn't serve my food, he had to force his kitchen staff to come up with a completely new menu in 24 hours. The critics who attended the opening night published brutal, scathing reviews. They wrote that the new food was tasteless, generic, and completely stripped of the magic that made the restaurant famous. They openly reported on the legal scandal, letting the whole city know that Greg had stolen the business from his wife and was now serving subpar garbage. Customers felt betrayed and completely stopped going. The 3-month waiting list vanished in less than a week. The beautiful dining room was entirely empty by the 2nd month. Because Greg had taken out a massive, high-interest business loan to fund the lavish renovations for Chloe, the sudden drop in revenue was a death sentence. Without my food, he had no income. Within 4 months, the restaurant completely collapsed. Greg was forced to default on the lease and declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy. He lost his fancy car, he lost the business, and he was drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal debt. And Chloe? The moment the money dried up and the VIP lifestyle disappeared, she packed her bags and left him for a wealthy real estate developer. Today, Greg is working as a shift manager at a chain steakhouse, wearing a polyester uniform and taking orders from a regional manager half his age. And me? I took the $50,000 he gave me, paired it with a small business loan, and opened a beautiful, cozy new restaurant on the other side of the city. It's fully booked for the next 6 months. And the best part? I own every single brick, every single recipe, and every single penny of the profit. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But in my experience, it tastes much better when it's served with a trademark infringement lawsuit. What would you guys have done in my situation? Would you have warned him about the trademarks during the divorce, or would you have set the trap exactly like I did? Let me know in the comments below, and if you want more deeply satisfying stories of true karma, don't forget to subscribe.